Hello and welcome to another episode of the Viva Bastardo show brought to you by the Hagerty Podcast Network. Today we have Sasha Selipanov, an extraordinary car designer. He's done a car you've probably never heard of, the Bugatti Chiron. He's also happened to be head designer of Koenigseggs. So it's fair to say he's got a little bit of experience designing extraordinary cars. We have an amazing conversation about those. We also talk about heavy metal, his love or not of the Mura, and a whole assortment of other things. So let's get into it. This episode brought to you by Hagerty Drive Share. Hagerty Drive Share is the coolest online car sharing platform around. Renting out your ride on Drive Share earns you extra cash to fund your own automotive adventures while also fueling the passion for fellow enthusiasts. Start earning today at driveshare.com or download the app. This podcast is brought to you by Aerovolt. Aerovolt was designed by Pete Brock, who just so happens to be the legendary designer of the Corvette Stingray and the Shelby Daytona Coupe. It's a car trailer that's made of aluminum and composite materials, incredibly efficient, incredibly aerodynamic. It's just a beautiful thing to look at also, as it turns out. Find out more at aerovolt.com or call them at Henderson, Nevada at 702-843-5320 and tell them Hagerty sent you. Where are you, man?
In Berlin.
Oh yeah, that's right.
At home.
I like the. So what was happening? I was trying to understand what was happening with the poster behind you. There was something on Instagram. Had they put that through one of those AI things and had churned that out?
So it's pretty nuts. I'll show you a close up. It's actually like made of needles.
Oh no shit.
I don't know if you're getting that. It's made of needles and some kind of
it.
thread or yarn or something.
Oh wait, fuck! That's done with that. That's all thread.
Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah,
Holy
it's crazy.
shit.
So I just got that in mail in post. I didn't order it or anything. I ordered a print of this, like a regular print for a friend. That's why it even says here, like, it's actually like, a friend of mine called Vux, and it's for him.
Right.
And then, I got the print that I'm going to send to him, but I also got this thing, which they just threw in there for free as a way to show what they can do.
That's amazing. I don't get things like that for free.
It's the first time it happened to me as well.
So thanks, by the way, man, for doing this.
My pleasure.
So are we starting? Are we recording? Oh, good. Okay. Hello, Sasha. Thank you for doing this again. I actually wrote down some stuff. Normally I don't write anything down. I blather. But I thought with you, you're quite serious. I should have some serious things. But before we get started and talk about your insanely horrifying, appalling, amazing, enviable car career, I want to ask you, can you explain to me what is the deal, man, with heavy metal? I don't understand it because I know you love heavy metal. I like punk music, and I feel like that because I like punk, I should like heavy metal, but I can't get into it. So what's the story? What is it about
metal is
that?
very multifaceted. I don't know what genre or subgenre of metal we're talking about here now, but yeah, I don't know. It's I guess the roots are similar to punk, right? It's about rebellion. It's about kind of non-conforming, not fitting in, and not necessarily being ashamed of not fitting in, but being sort of, direct and upfront and arrogant about it in a way. So it's loud, it's violent. I like those things.
Well, I was going to say, I feel like that maybe represents you, or some of those things represent you. I mean, when I see how you present yourself, man, you are what an old boss of mine called me. I think you may also be a pathological contrarian. Like you're very. Is that true? Do you think?
I think that could be the case. I do enjoy arguing. I think I even had arguing as one of my hobbies in my resume when I first applied for a job, and they thought it was funny, so I got the gig.
That's good. So going back to that pathological contrarian thing. I think that you're. It's interesting because when I look at the work you've done, like the Genesis project, the and particularly Koenigsegg seems so much to fit who you are, because I feel like what we're experiencing now in car design is a bit. Do you know what Rococo is? I feel like that's a little bit of what we're experiencing in car design, like a surplus of kind of vents and fins and fans and active aero and all this kind of stuff. And so it's this sort of orgy of bits, and you're anti-orgy of bits, it seems.
Yeah, it's like a friend of mine called it eye cancer.
Right. Okay. That's good. It is. It is. It's exactly like that.
I couldn't find a better, I couldn't coin a better term myself, so I'm gonna borrow it from him. It's eye
Well,
cancer.
before go on. Sorry, man. Go on.
Yeah, no, it's also it's the fact that car design as we know it today. I mean, car design has always been about fashion, but we've sort of taken that to an extreme now, where there is only fashion left. It's kind of it's an empty shell very often these days, just a candy wrapper without anything beneath it. And there was always a case to be made for car design being just that, but I think, like I said, we've just taken it to a whole new extreme of zero substance and all
What
glitter.
do you think is the who is the poster boy car for zero? Can you? I don't know if you could say this, but who would you? I know I can happily vent like an old man about stuff, but who would you consider as the poster boy for zero caloric value?
I have a very difficult time calling out names, only mainly because I know all of them personally. And the last
Okay,
thing I want to do is
that
start off
makes sense.
a podcast with you
With a
know
savaging.
exactly. But it's not fair. I think, like I said, there was always that in car design. I would say from Futurama, from the GM days, and
Yeah.
there was always entertainment, and there was always fashion, and there was always just the straightforward business of selling cars, and that demanded a certain amount of entertainment and fashion. But today, we've learned so much about making cars over the last 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever decades, and by learning so much about how to make a correct car, correct, in parentheses, it's safety, and the pressure to bring costs down, and it's ways to improve, I don't know, logistics of production and all these things. That means there's less and less freedom, and the only thing that you can do is cheap glitter, and that's the way to get cars sold. By and large. That doesn't mean there are no exceptions, but the industry has kind of rid itself of experimentation and rid itself of let's say, wacky, clumsy mistakes that are somehow cool because we know how to make a good car now. And but by knowing how to make a good car, we've also restricted creativity to such an extent that you are only left with a few millimeters of wiggle room, and that wiggle room is used to create more visual eye cancer.
You think we've squeezed the efficiency of car design and manufacture squeezed all the interesting bits out of it?
I don't. I think that's the mainstream, automotive mainstream. That's where they're at. But when I hear of things happening at those startups right now, and little whispers here and there of what Apple may or may not be doing with their product, and I think there's great potential for innovation. But let's just say that the mainstream, like everybody who wants to stay within the confines of comfortable known process, you always end up with comfortable known results. And again, the only wiggle room there is just chrome bits and shiny bits, and yeah,
I mean,
facelifts and
the only people I might argue, since you like a good argument, Sasha,
uh,
let's get started.
literally, come on,
The
bring it
only
on.
thing, uh, what about I would actually argue that your old bosses, Hyundai, um, they're for me, the only mainstream people who are really doing interesting things. What do you think about that?
Hard for me because it's all about ups and downs, and the sheer volume of work is so vast that it's very hard to focus on something. It feels to me that cars are no longer landmarks anymore. That it's just the quantity of vehicles being produced and designed at the same time. I just there is when you have a portfolio of 45 cell phones, it's very hard to make the iPhone. You know what I mean? So I don't even I can't even follow the output of these major car manufacturers anymore, just because of the sheer quantity of stuff that is being offloaded. And landmark cars are very well, by definition, very few and far in between. And I don't know whether Hyundai or Volkswagen or when was the last time a real landmark car has been delivered by a mainstream OEM. I would probably have to go back to, well, let me think, not to not to forget something important, but I don't know, Golf Mark One, Mark IV Golf, yeah. So
Golf Mark One was my first ever car.
Yeah, that's a beautiful car, but I'm still gonna stick with Mark IV because I think that's a very,
Do you not think what about the VW, shit, I can't remember the name, but that incredibly, hyper efficient car with the spats and the what about that?
XL1.
Yeah,
XL1.
the XL1.
Yeah, that was
Wasn't that
super cool. Love that, yeah.
I love that car. I thought that
Yeah,
was remarkably surprising. What
yeah.
other landmark cars can you think
A
of?
lot of a lot of the guys in the studio where I worked at the time were involved in that project, so that was a very much near me in a way. So, I didn't work on it personally, but I saw it from inception to completion, from a corner of my eye. Very cool project. Good team.
It's interesting because, having sort of, listened to you talk a little bit about cars and stuff, it seems only natural that you would have ended actually, I don't know, we should have started I'm a totally shit podcast host. I should have started off by explaining who you are and what you've done, as opposed to getting into it like 20 minutes later. So, Sasha, do you want me to do it? Or do you wanna do it? It's up
Well,
to you. Paper, rock,
let's
scissors?
yeah, I don't know. I would like to not take, too much credit for things I didn't do, and therefore,
Well, then
yeah.
just take credit for the things you did do. Why don't we just leave it at that?
Well, I had yeah, I'm a big car, fanatic. I love sports cars primarily, and for someone who loves sports cars, I had a pretty, incredible and fun career designing cars so far. I had a great time, working at Lamborghini, at Bugatti, at Koenigsegg most recently. I spent a few years at Genesis as well, Hyundai Genesis. At Bugatti, I worked on the exterior of the Chiron and the exterior of the Vision Gran Turismo. At Lamborghini, I was part of the Huracan exterior team, worked on that exterior there as well. And then at Koenigsegg, I was head of design and responsible for pretty much stuff that came out in the last couple of years.
Well, and also let's not forget the Genesis, concept.
Essentially, yeah,
Yeah, the Essentia.
yeah,
You know what was interesting about that, man? I love that car. Uh, I'm not saying this because I'm talking to you, but uh, I thought that it was, and this is going to sound odd, but I found it was beautifully old fashioned in its proportions, and I really love that. Like this sort of long hood, the low roof line. Like there was this kind of the GT Tourer thing, but it was an electric car, right? If I'm not mistaken.
yeah. It was an
Yeah,
electric car, and yeah, go ahead.
it was just so, I don't know, like the proportions were so, um it reminded, do you know the Lamborghini Islero?
Sure.
Is that the kind of car you might have designed if you were around in the '70s?
I was more thinking of the 250 Lusso when we were working on that project.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay, I have a pet peeve with the 250 Loose. Ready for another argument?
go for it.
The front 3 quarters is amazing, but the back rear window where it meets the
Yeah,
edge of
the
that just makes me crazy.
really, I like
Yeah,
that a lot.
you
I
do?
Yeah, I very much like it. I mean, it like every other car from that era, it has a few quirky bits that take a bit of time getting used to, but, like, as opposed to the 250 California, which I'll never get used to, that
Right.
the Lusso is just so graceful. I love the way that rear end is low and feels so planted, and it has such a graceful stance. It's on the one hand very athletic, but also somehow manages to be very aristocratic and non-aggressive. So there's this interesting mix of high class, but also athleticism in that car that for me is really pretty. Really tried to bring that onto the Essentia project, and then again, it's worth mentioning that of course I'm not alone working on projects like these. I was head of advanced design for Genesis at the time. This project happened in the team that I led. I did work on that exterior, sort of hands-on very much, but there was a bunch of people, a bunch of different talents with us at the time, and I think it was a very good project as a result of that.
And let's just jump forward to Koenigsegg. I once owned a Lancia Stratos for a while, for like
Oh
5
wow!
years. And
Not jealous.
man, I've had all manner of I've had all manner of strange cars, but one of the things that, and I know this is gonna seem weird, but that front windscreen of the Stratos, there's I s when I first saw Koenigsegg, it kind of weirdly, like, that little bit reminded me of the Stratos, and the thing I love about Koenigsegg, as opposed to, if I had the zillions to have a hypercar, I'm not really interested in them for the most part, because they're just too. I feel like most of those cars you buy so you can show people you have the money to own those cars. Do you know what I mean? Like a Pagani or whatever it is. But the thing I like about Koenigsegg is it's sort of like this mobile
bunker. It's got this you know what I mean? It's like a gun turret on wheels, but in the best possible. Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah, in the best possible way. It a and I love the kind of well, one of the things I do love is, um, I love that it's so, it's aggressive, but it's in the same way that you were talking about the Genesis or the Lusso. It kind of it's not an aggressiveness that, it's not like a pantomime, uh, childish aggressiveness. It's kind of a it's almost like a technical aggressiveness. Does that make sense? And that
Yeah,
seems very much
absolutely.
like you, actually.
I mean, it's all quite intentional. It's none of it sort of happens by chance. I do think that when we speak about aggressive cars or aggressive looking cars, that you know what we imagine when we say those words isn't truly aggressive. It is just a cartoon character that is harmless in a way, but truly menacing stuff and truly like really aggressive in a way that can you know sort of put weight behind its message, not just superficial, but truly like I don't know, power that is inspiring of so much confidence that you don't need to be overtly aggressive anymore. There is just such a it's almost like a supreme being in a way that it doesn't need to shout anymore. It's just so serenely confident, but you kind of look at it and even without seeing it up close or in detail, just the proportions alone tell you all you need to know about how capable this thing actually is. I don't think that cars need to shout necessarily. I think that well, they don't need to do anything other than be what they're meant to be, right? So if the car is truly powerful and truly supreme in its performance, then its shape should reflect that without trying too hard. So the trying too hard part is certainly what kills it for me when cars are trying to appear more than more expensive than they truly are or more performant than they truly are. It's this balance between sort of what's inside with what's on the outside that either makes the product holistically beautiful or makes it kind of a confused, contrived, yeah, trying too hard. It's just that in that balance, between substance and form is where things happen. I think with Koenigsegg, it's very uh, in a way, it's easier than with other brands because obviously, Christian is a very strong character, and he's very much around. And not many sports car companies have their founder uh, so involved in daily
Alive.
business or alive, obviously. So it's much easier because you spend time with him, and I have a good connection with him. So we spend time talking about philosophy and art or design or music or just arguing about stuff, and it's just so much fun designing after that because you know exactly sort of what sort of person he is and what sort of person you are. It's just a very straightforward design process. You don't have to wonder what would the founder do if he was around. You just text him. So,
Well, I imagine it in some ways it's much more enjoyable to work for a dictator than it is to work for a committee.
yes, but that wouldn't
A
apply to
benevolent
him.
dictator, I would say.
That wouldn't apply to him. I don't think he's a dictator. I think this is what I find a little bit similar between us. We are opinionated, but we're also interested in changing our opinion if we're faced with a convincing argument from the other side. There is no hesitancy I think, in a truly confident and um, sort of confidence is one part of it, but also in a truly aware mind, there should be no hesitancy in changing sides. When you're
Absolutely.
proven wrong, or you even sense that there's potential in the other train of thought, it's always a good idea to listen in and yeah, I don't think he's a dictator, and I don't think that I've ever worked for dictators
Well,
necessarily.
I guess not well, look, maybe that was a poor choice of words. By dictator, I don't mean someone who only thinks their idea is the best, but I mean a singular vision, a singular person as opposed to multiple people.
Yeah,
I
for
find that
sure, 100%.
I find that I'm an artist and occasionally I work with other people, I collaborate with other people, and as you say, you have to be always ready to completely concede that you're wrong, and I take real delight when someone shows me something better than the thing I had.
Absolutely, because that just
It's
elevates the result
That's
ultimately.
right. That's exactly right. Yeah. You're interesting, man, because you're kind of an engineer and an aerodynamicist and a designer all simultaneously. And I suspect that all of those things go into how you think about the car, which is unlike, I'm guessing, how you're talking about other people or other cars seem to be covered in frills. So you're always whittling.
Yeah, but I mean, I wouldn't be able to call myself any of those things because those are just hobbies of mine. I like to read up on aero, and I do like to read up on engineering, and I do like to nerd out. That's just kind of a character trait. So when there's a subject that I like, I tend to sort of really dig in
Isn't
deep.
it satisfying to do that? To find
Yeah,
a there's nothing more joyful than finding a wormhole, a new rabbit hole you can just tumble down and
absolutely.
just get lost in all the minutiae of what this new world will reveal to you.
100%. I love it. I think nerdiness is totally underrated and should be made into some sort of a goal you strive for in life.
I think at this point Okay, so let me ask you this, man. What kind of rabbit holes have you been falling down recently that are
Oh, well,
non-car related?
yeah, I've always had the same view. I mean, I'm super into sort of science in general. I really like cosmology and quantum mechanics. I love reading about scientists, of the 20th century and figuring out how is it that their big revelations came to them, and then reading up on string theory right now and why it's potentially a dead end or whatever it may be. So I do like sciences, and that's something I'm really kind of keen on. But again, it's I'm not a scientist. I wouldn't be able to write down any of the equations for you. I mean, probably some of the very basic stuff, but nothing in depth.
Yeah, but all
Then
as my dad used to say, all of it is grist for the mill, as in everything you absorb ends up regurgitated out in some, and it influences how you think, how you design, how you come up with cars, all the rest of it. I had an I
ultimately,
spoke I spoke to do you know who Pete Brock is? I'm sure you do.
yeah,
The design of so I had a conversation with him last week, and we come across there was this extraordinary story where he came across some aerodynamic research done by German scientists in 1939. That was when the GIs got to Germany, they found all this stuff. Do you know this story?
no,
Oh, it's amazing, man. So they when the GIs came to Germany, they found all this information. They would make copies of it and send copies of this information to all the people they thought might be interested. So they found all this aerodynamic research. They sent all the American car manufacturers. He comes across it in the 50s, and in 1960, that's how he comes up with the idea of, Dr. Cam, whatever his name was, the
right.
camtail.
Yeah,
That's how it ends
Camtail.
up on the Shelby, the Taylor Shelby.
Wow,
There's this direct line from 1939 German scientist to Pete Brock. Isn't it?
amazing.
It was such a great story. But again, he was not dissimilar to you. Like he was very interested. He wasn't an aerodynamicist, but he was interested in it and he read about it.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to research and so much to learn. It's I don't know, kind of daunting if you think about it. How little time we have to explore all those different things.
Or
Sciences is one
exhilarating.
thing, but I'm also very well, obviously, very much into metal, and all sorts of underground stuff that is very inspiring for me, aesthetically and sort of as a singular kind of powerful vision of what can be achieved in life. Yeah.
Like what exactly? That was very
Um,
vague.
yeah, it is pretty vague, I guess. There's this guy who I'm really sort of following for a few years now, very inspiring to me. He's Aaron Turner. He's a American artist, a musician, and he was behind a very very influential band back in the early 2000s called ISIS. Way before that
Oh
name
yeah,
became associated with a terrorist
right.
organization. Was actually a goddess of femininity from Egypt.
Yep.
So they played this kind of very, very heavy, very slow churning, very repetitive, super minimalist music that for me was very impressive in the metal landscape because metal is so much about showing off and showmanship in general, and these guys were just the most understated, the most like, but also by far the heaviest for what I heard back
This
then.
is, you know what? This is fascinating, man, because what you're talking about is your view of car design.
Well, I'm
I mean,
very
it's the
influenced by
same thing,
those
right?
guys.
It's not showy. It's pared down. It's kind of intellectually interesting,
Heaviest shit ever.
heavy as shit.
So he went on to do some other stuff too. He did this amazing project called Sumac. That's what he's working on right now, and these guys are just taking it to a whole new level in terms of heaviness and also improvisation and working with sort of crazy Japanese artists and creating noisescapes, and it has its roots in heavy music, it has its roots in metal, but it's just transcended. It's more of an art installation than it is a metal concert. When you go to those shows, it's a completely different. Um, so
It's
I'm into that
interesting.
stuff, but it's also not
I
on
want
the
to check it
surface.
out.
You don't just sort of stumble upon it if you're just browsing through your whatever Apple Music playlist or K Rock, whatever. So
K-pop.
it's not on
You're
radio.
also really into K-pop, Sasha? That would be a
Mm,
revelation.
no, no, no.
Come on, man. I know you're a big boy band, Korean boy band fan.
Mm,
Come now, sir.
hasn't really clicked for me yet. I'll give it another
It
shot.
will, trust me. When you get it, man, it's gonna change how you design cars.
Absolutely.
So so, um, so you designed the Gemera, Koenigsegg Gemera. Um, so it's interesting because there was a time in the 70s and 80s when people were designing four-seater sports cars ish. The Espada. You know what I'm weirdly obsessed with now is the Mondial. For some strange reason, I'm drawn to it. You can leave the podcast now if you want to. Just hang up if you're offended. I don't know
Oh,
why I'm
it has a
weirdly interested.
prancing. It has a prancing horse. It's okay.
No, 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 it's not. I'm listen, man. In all the cars I've ever collected, I've always tried to buy things that interest me and that are not popular. So I've
Right.
avoided Ferrari like the plague. I mean, I was massively into Group B, all that sort of stuff. Um, so why do you think there was this? What made you guys say, you know, we should do a four-seater hypercar? I guess as opposed to, I mean, I guess SUV was out of the question, right?
So that car has a really weird backstory. I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes talking about it. In 2007, I think, or yeah, sometime around then, Christian had the idea of doing a four-seat hypercar, and he even started doing some preliminary sort of sketches for it. I think they even built like a seating buck, like a simple sort of proportion study for the interior of that car. And around the same time, I did this sketch of a four-seat Koenigsegg with Koenigsegg wheels and everything else, and it was a mid-engine hypercar four-seater Koenigsegg. And when I went finally for my interview to Koenigsegg in 2000, whenever that was, like late 18, early 19, I don't remember now, like 3 years ago, more than that. Um, he showed me a technical drawing of that car, and I realized I had seen that somewhere because the sketch that I made wasn't just a sketch; it had an actual technical drawing behind it that I put together. So there was an engine, there was a four-wheel drive, it had, the occupants, and everything was laid out properly. So I actually dug up the file on one of my old hard drives, and I screenshotted the file with the original save date, which was something like April 2007, which is the same time he was sketching that out on his
No
side as well.
shit.
Yeah. So then I said, "Look, Christian, check this out," and he was like he really sort of believes in these sort of mental connections, and in a way, so do I, because I don't know what this reality is actually made of. It's a big question. So it was quite a weird thing that when he came up with the idea, sometime around the same time, I did this sketch of a side view of this what will eventually become the Chimera. So why not SUV? Well, because the experience of driving something that is low to the ground and you feel, sort of not on top of the wheels, but in between the wheels, it's just the right place to be in a sports car. You don't want to feel like you're going to tip over going into a corner. So this sensation of being totally in control and perfectly within the confines of the car, but it's always been limited to two people, and why can't that experience be extended out to a group of friends or a family of four? So the idea to do this project, I think, was always a no-brainer. If you think about it, every time another car company has tried to do a four-seat car, it's always been more closely related to a luxury car than to a sports car. And that has kind of been the case from Espada times all the way to Panamera or GTC4 Lusso, whatever that thing is called. So
You're talking about the driving dynamics in a way, right?
not just the driving dynamics, it's the aesthetics, it's the message of the product. It's never like there's the Murcielago, and there's the Countach, and then there's the Espada, and then there's the Panamera. There's a divide between them. They're
Sure.
the four seaters are never quite as hyper as the hypercars of the same brand. They're just always,
Right.
they come with extra load of leather and wood and
They're hyper-ish.
hyperish, yeah. And also platform wise, they're probably closer related to road cars than they are to sort of uh, um, pure blood, thoroughbred performance cars. They're sort of delineating from the hyper sedan that they have somewhere in the parts bin, and they just make it slightly more hyper for that. But what I wanted to do back in the day, and what was coincidentally very similar to what Christian was thinking, I was always wondering why can't those brands make a four-seat car with effectively four bucket seats and four-point harnesses and four, you know what I mean? Just this extreme experience. Do you remember this Espace F1 concept that
Yeah. Oh,
Renault?
wait. The Renault Espace or the one with the F1 engine or
Yeah, yeah,
just
yeah.
the
F1.
minivan? Yeah. Oh, I know, man. I love that thing.
Yeah, yeah.
There's another version of that with the Jaguar XJ220 engine.
Right. Seen that
Yeah,
one too.
I love those things.
So the Espace F1 as a kid, I remember seeing it. I think Alain Prost was driving journalists in that car, and they had
Yeah,
this V12 straight in the interior of the car.
yeah.
It was just the coolest thing ever. And I mean, of course, Gemera is not like that. It doesn't have a V12 in the interior, but it's still a proper mid-engine car with incredible driving dynamics, and it's the closest thing you can get to a where it's actually faster than most two-seat hypercars. I don't know anything else that can do the kind of numbers that this thing is going to be producing. Very exciting project, and also in a way a first for me because working other projects that I worked on always had a predecessor in the lineage, and this car has no predecessor. This was like truly a clean sheet of paper design. So when I joined the company and brought the first guys on board with me to the design department, we were basically just you know working off of a clean sheet of paper, which was
What a
amazing. And
dream,
Christian
man.
Christian
What a
did
dream.
a pretty thorough engineering development with the team, but just simply design wise, like sculpture and nailing the proportions and working out the volumes and not having to reference a previous car in the lineage. That was a very rewarding experience.
I imagine that the shadow of previous work must loom large for a designer. And in a way, it must really hamper creativity because you've always got to be considering continuing that brand language, continuing that design language forward. Right? Is that a little bit how it feels? And I would imagine with the but and you even with the Gemera, you have to still continue
Very much.
the
And that's not
Koenigsegg.
necessarily what I meant. That's not necessarily what I meant. I think you always have to consider the brand heritage, and the car has to fit the lineup and has to fit the vision of the brand and has to be part of the portfolio. That's not what was talking about. I was mainly talking about, let's say you have a Veyron and you're working on a Chiron. Well, yeah, there is a certain amount of freedom in that, but there's still a previous car that already has customer feedback to what works and what
Right.
doesn't. It already has road feedback to what works and what doesn't. And then you get all of that, and then there's also always looming question of what are actually the carryover parts. What are we going to develop from scratch? What other parts we're just going to take off the shelf? What other parts we're going to take off the shelf and slightly modify and make them like new? But with Gemera, it is basically like you learn everything in the scope of this project. There was no previous project to have learned from. There is the first time you're putting the door on that car is the first time a door of that size was ever fitted to a car. You know what I mean? You learn it the hard
Right.
way. There's collisions, things don't right away work out, and it's rewarding because you get to experience sort of the full pain and the full joy of figuring out everything about the car.
That sounds exhilarating, man. It really
That's
does.
fun.
So you left Koenigsegg.
Yeah, I left Koenigsegg. When was it actually? 1st of March this
Okay.
year.
And now you're in Berlin.
We have a home in Berlin. My wife and I, we built a little house here when we were quite a bit younger, and our kids were born here in Berlin. So we kind of always wanted to go back to Berlin, and we're very happy to be back in Germany. Ultimately, we're kind of, I guess you could say, we're city people. So I really missed, both of us missed the life in the city, and I think I went to more concerts in the first 3-4 weeks of being back in Berlin than I did well, it was COVID times, admittedly, so it's not fair to compare. But nevertheless, living in a rural sort of Swedish,
What were
uh,
you going to see? Like easy jazz, light jazz
as, you,
concerts?
as you can imagine, just all sorts of hip hop and raves and that sort of stuff.
That seems you, Sasha.
Yeah.
You love a good rave.
Mm,
Uh, I so what are you doing?
What
What
am
are
I
you
doing?
doing, Sasha?
I don't know. Just trying to not leave any stones unturned in my pursuit of uh,
You would be an
creative goals.
amazing you would be an amazing politician, man. You have mastered the art of the cloudy phrase.
No, there's no cloudy phrase. I mean, I went to Koenigsegg. I always wanted to go there. I was
Right.
always a big
Well, didn't
fan.
you emailed him when you were a kid, right? Or when
Yeah,
you were
well, student at art center.
right.
So not that much of a kid anymore, but I didn't have any experience. So I emailed Christian back then saying, "Yeah, heard about your company. Really like to team up one day. Are you guys hiring?" And he said, "No, not anytime soon, but would be nice to keep in touch indeed." And so we did stay in touch. So yeah, I went there. I learned a lot from that experience and adding it to the Bugatti thing that I did before that, and Genesis and Lambo and VW years. And it's been a while. It's been I think my first job, my first internship was 2003. My first full time job was '05. So it's already been like around 20 years in the industry by now.
But man, I mean, what a look. I mean, I know you know this already, and it's kind of ridiculous to say it, but fuck, what a career! Because for me at least, you've worked at places where they've been doing, and it's you've had Hyundai, you've had Koenigsegg, which in some to me at least seems to represent so much of how you think about things and how you'd like to do things. But working on the Bugatti Chiron is is no small potatoes either, and the rest of them. Um, I was watching a video of I was watching a video of you going to meet the Polestar guys,
Right.
and Christian's driving, and
Yeah.
there is a moment where you are just giggling. He clearly, like, steps on the gas man, and you are just laughing. I mean, I could see, like, the joy in your face at being in something that clearly is, like, trouser changingly fast.
Yeah, he actually he had me drive on the way back, so that was fun.
How was that?
Good, amazing. It's amazing. Fantastic
Do you not
experience.
get scared driving super quickly or relatively
I
quickly, let's
did
say?
get scared the first time it happened, and since then that was so scary that nothing else seems to scare me quite as much. Because
I
I
have
went
a
from driving a Golf GTI to driving a Veyron, and I've never driven anything in between. So it was literally like, "Here's your
it's one
GTI,"
that's a very binary experience, man.
and I'm not gonna retell the exact location or who was in the car, but whoever was in the car told me, "Stop driving like a grandma and just floor it." And then soon after that, we were doing 360 or some ridiculous number like that on the autobahn. So and then when I got out of the car, I realized that was a life changing experience. I always loved sports cars, but I had absolutely no idea what driving that fast actually felt like, and the
I've also
acceleration.
been accused of being a grandma. I mean, I so I bought about 6 months ago, I bought an XJ220.
No way,
Um,
that's awesome.
well, because for me, man, I feel like it's interesting because I was thinking about hypercars. I always wanted an XJ220. I was gonna buy one like 10 years ago. I ended up getting an 037 instead. But
Mhm.
the 220
That's a
for
cool
me,
car too, man. That's a
oh
lovely car.
man, I mean, I mean, I'm happy to talk about cars endlessly. I'm glad you like the 220, man. I was afraid when I mentioned it, you'd be like, you'd say, "Oh, that's a shit car."
No,
But
no, I mean anything that has to do with like childhood years of being, for the first time indoctrinated into the world of like sports cars and XJ220, B110, sort of the no, not the 959. I'm sorry, that's never going to be
it
on
was
the.
so okay. So here's a thought. Tell me what you think of this, man. I think that I think in some ways, even the 220 was the very beginning of um, radical design in cars, even though it's not such a radical shape. But then when you see it in person, the idea of it, the essence of it, the thing of it is so unusual to me. Of all the cars, even from the 90s or I mean, barring all the amazing kind of concept car stuff from the 70s, um, there's the F40 or the EB110 or the 959, but those things were sort of evolutionary to me, whereas the 220 is this kind of leap into some kind of chasm of lunacy. Now, I'm happy if you tell me I'm wrong, but I'm very interested to know what you think. We can have an argument, man. Your favorite.
No, no, I'm not going to argue because I feel somewhat similar. I think that I love the F40 and I love the 288 GTO, but they're effectively the 308 cabins that have been brought to a more powerful condition by adding wheel, stands to them and putting more powerful engines. And obviously, it's a different car, but the ergo of the cabin is still from the 308 in a way in those cars, and 959 is very much a 911 with a crazy complicated turbo system and four-wheel drive, but it's still a 911 sort of cabin in there. And in a way, the XJ220 is, at least from the how low slung and how extreme the body of that car is, probably reminds me more of a 90s Countach than anything else. It's just kind of
Right.
it's gone through through the obligatory microwave session. Like everything else in the 90s had to stay in the microwave before it was presented. So it kind of melted a little bit, but
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's funny. Yeah, yeah. Well, there was that kind of blobby. That was that thing. That weird sort of. I mean, it wasn't really Ital design. There was that brief period in the late '90s, or sorry, late '80s, early '90s, when Ital design went off on like a mushroom-induced other area. I saw a 288 the other day, man. And okay, here's one of my pet peeves. When you see someone driving a fancy car, like this guy was driving a 288, and the license plate was 288. I I hate that because I feel like I know it's a 288, but I just want to let everyone else know in case you're unsure that I'm driving 288. Here's another. It just it kills me. But the thing about the 288, like you said, man, is I wish that it's mechanically it's a phenomenal car, and I wish they had just not been such lazy bastards and designed something that wasn't an evolution of the 308 form. I wish they just made it look different.
I can't say anything negative about that car because it's probably my favorite exterior of all time. So
Is it? I've just made an ass of myself,
that's
basically,
all
is what
right.
you're telling
That's
me.
okay.
You're
Yeah,
used to it. You were
you're
expecting it.
forgiven. You're the guy who likes the XJ220. Come on.
I thought you said it was a good car, man. Now
It
it's a
is not.
shit car.
It is not on the 288 GTO level.
No, you're right. You're right. But that's the fastest car I've ever owned. I've never owned anything with more than like 300 horsepower. Um, even though a lot of the stuff I've owned looks like it's fast, it just isn't. But the way the power is delivered in the 220 is just so trouser. It's like a full brown trouser situation for me
Because it's
because
a
I'm like
turbo lag. It's a ton of turbo lag, right?
well, the turbo's coming on, so it's not like it's a surprise. But then it's just like Thor's hammer. Like it's just relentless, and then of course the brake, there's no ABS, no traction control, the
That's
brakes are unassisted. So you almost have to sort of deploy a chute, Tupolev style, out the back before when you want to slow down. Anyway, I don't want to talk about all that stuff, man. Because so what cars other than so you're a Ferrari geezer? Is that what you're telling me? The 288 is your favorite?
it always changes between all sorts of different Ferraris.
Okay. What do you think of the 250 LM? That's one of my all-time favorites.
I really like the LM. It's really pretty. From the 250 range, I would probably have to say it's the short wheelbase most often that I'm like in love with. 250 short wheelbase for me is the first car that has something like modern stance. By modern stance, I mean negative camber and wheels pulled out
Right.
properly. So it's a really nicely stanced car for the time. And if you compare that to sort of deflated, demotivated, eager for nothing E-type stance,
Oh, that's the savaging of the E-Type, man. I thought you didn't want to say anything bad about anyone. It's okay. That was like 50 years ago.
only the dead people.
Yeah, you could savage the dead people. Well, you're right. I mean, the only reason that I'm a super nerd weirdo, so like I've always preferred things that are like the thing I like about the 250 LM is it's a little odd. The back, that flat back half is a little bit strange, but that weird tension to me makes it more interesting. You're right. The 250 short wheelbase is a classically like it's a classical Greek sculpture. It's
Yeah,
beautifully
maybe it's a
proportioned.
bit too mainstream. What about the 312P, the prototype?
The Dino, is that the Dino? The
No,
yellow?
no, that's
No.
that's a Formula One engine, sort of the really tiny V12, way well a little bit after the 330 P4. It's like a lot of people say it's been pancakified because it's just so flat. I love it. It's just the meanest, flattest like
Wait, I
beast
have
of
to.
a
I should Google this. Are you
yeah,
googling it?
312P.
312p.
Yeah.
Okay, someone my Matt over here is going to Google and show me. Now you may have out obscured me, Sasha. Shit.
Well, all right.
Uh, Oh, yeah, yeah. No, I love that. I love that. Thanks, man. That's genius. But that whole kind of Lola-esque shape, the all that stuff for
270 a
me,
little bit, yeah. Yeah.
yeah, they're utterly
Love those
beautiful.
things.
Uh, What else? What else? What anything recent or vaguely modern that appeals to you or not really?
Yeah, well, again, and one of my very favorite exteriors, probably hard to top, is the second arrival of the Ford GT. So the Camillo Pardo 2002 show car.
Yeah.
Production car is gorgeous too, but that show car just like mind-numbingly
You like the
beautiful.
third
Love that.
version or not so much?
Sorry, the latest one.
Yeah.
Well, see, the latest one is a little bit of trying too hard for my taste, but that 2002, 2004, that thing is just effortless. It's stunning. It's beautiful. It's also got this very kind of badass masculine vibe to it. This interior is so chunky, and the wheels. It's just like, yeah, badass.
I came very close to buying one of those when they were cheap in in quotes. But I've always found that the GT40 for me is one of my all time favorite designs. I
Absolutely.
just when I was talking to Pete Brock, he was telling me how what's his name, Eric, what's his name at Lola had designed the GT40, and then Ford took it and they turned it into a totally shit car, which I was unaware of. Did you know that?
Mhm.
Yeah, well, when Ford took it, they brought it over. They were like, "Okay, we can do much better than this English guy," and they redesigned it, and then it had all these terrible aerodynamic problems. So
I,
then, if it
I I
had,
did read a few books about it, and it must have been somewhere in there, like the Go Like Hell, right? That was pretty.
yeah, yeah,
But here's an unpopular opinion: a Miura is
excellent.
exactly, a Miura is a shitty GT40.
Oh, yeah. You know what? I love that. That's genius. You're right.
It's
No,
like an E-Type version of a GT40.
you're
E-Type
right.
because it has the stance messed up. It looks good in side view, but only then.
Yeah, because it's weirdly like it seems like the bonnet's too long or something.
I think the track is just too narrow for the car. It's overbodied like crazy. The A-pillars are wider than the track. I mean, you can't have a car that has a cabin that is wider than the wheels. It doesn't work. And it's
You're gonna
designed in
wake up
side
tomorrow
view.
morning and there's gonna be enraged car nerds outside your house with flickering torches,
Yeah,
pitchforks.
I've
No,
said this to many people already. I really don't like the Miura. It's kind of doesn't do anything for me whatsoever.
I have to say I don't disagree. I mean, and in part again because I'm a pathological contrarian, I don't like I tend not to like cars that everyone is frothing over. It just
And
I
they're like,
just
"Oh, it's the most beautiful car." Really?
yeah yeah I would prefer not. Um, So we're talking about you. I think in one of your discussions, you were talking about choosing, like taking inspiration from animals in terms of aggressiveness for inspiring you for in terms of aggressive cues for cars. So what what animals are left? You know, I have to,
I don't necessarily like to be inspired by animals. I think that's a very how do it's like a level 1 approach. It's like if you haven't really dug deep yet, you're just starting out
right,
and you're like, I'm just gonna look at a bunch of cats and try to make this thing like, you know,
right,
beautiful. Nah, that's not how it works. I think the thing is about cars is that because they move and because they are in a way avatars for us, right? So kind of we are inside the car and the world sees the car before they see us. So there's a lot of personality projection that is happening both from us towards the car and from the car towards us. There's this kind of interplay of personalities going on. So we inadvertently end up giving cars almost they're almost alive for us, right? There's the sense that the car is somehow not fully inanimate, that there is a personality there, and it's because of that interplay between our own, what we aspire to be, sporty, athletic, fast, all conquering, and then the car is there to sort of represent that in some way, and then of course that's why we end up relating it to animals, and um, there's one more component to it, just like an animal. A car is part of this physical reality, and for it to perform well, it needs to sort of be genetically right. By what I mean by that, it needs to have good weight distribution. It needs to be, well, sort of planted on its wheels. It needs to be able to. We're talking about performance cars here. Put power and torque down onto the road, and there's all these kind of physics derived concepts that, if done right, give the car a healthy look, right? And this is the same thing that like a top predator would need to have an ability to put torque and muscle power down onto the surface of the earth, right? To be able to leap. So there's a lot of kind of uh, um, kinematic and almost uh, um, it's a cross between physics and biology that we end up seeing as a common space between cars and animals, right? There's some kind of genetic relation between them. Um, and what I like to think of is, if you have just this, you're sitting in a dark room and the door is open and it's very light outside, so you don't see much detail, but shapes are being paraded in front of that open doorway. And if you see a top predator, you right away feel like you need to probably run, hide, and protect yourself. Or if you see a posture of a human being, you know if it's a friend or a foe right away. You can right away discern whether that person is there to challenge you or there to potentially help you. There's a lot of things that are happening with just the silhouettes, and I really like to think of cars, because of this animalistic connection that they have, and because of this sort of relation to life forms that cars have. I also like to think of them in terms of this sort of pure silhouette situation. It doesn't necessarily mean a side view. It can be just even a three-quarter view in a silhouette, or it could be a front view as a pure sculptural silhouette that is being backlit, so you don't see any details, but you know right away whether you're looking at something that is, you know, begging for forgiveness or ready to hunt you down. Like it's
That's fantastic, man. I love that. There's some. So, are you familiar with Brancusi?
no.
He's a sculptor, Italian sculptor, and you should actually check him out, man. I think you'd like him. He one of the sculptures he's most famous for is the sculpture called Bird in Flight, and it's essentially the
I can look it up
idea
right
of what yeah, if you Google Bird in Flight Brancusi, it's the idea of what a bird feels like when it's in flight, but it's the idea of it, so it's an abstract
now. Oh,
representation.
cool. Yeah.
So, because it's beautiful what you're talking about, man. You're kind of talking not about design, but well, yes, about design, but about the idea of a kind of instinctual reaction to stance and to silhouette and to shape.
But I overthink these things. It's not. I don't just. I'm never guided by just like an inspiration. I always
Of
have to like
course.
rationalize it, compartmentalize it, and I'm just
You
like,
overthink things? Surely not, Sasha.
sorry,
You
overthinking. Yes.
overthink, surely. Well, look, but yeah, but that's the thing. I suspect that I think that you know how I said earlier that I think maybe you're a bit of a whittler. You know what whittling is whittling is when you have a stick and a knife and you shave the end of the stick down to a very sharp point. So I suspect
I love doing that.
so I suspect what you do is you start off with this massive kind of this ball of theory and ideas, and then you sharpen and sharpen and sharpen until the ideas, because that's what I do as an artist is I start with a blurry concept and then I sharpen until it's really pointy. And it seems like maybe that's what you do as a designer.
Well, every project is a way to sort of get somehow closer to this target, but you always feel like you fell short, so you need another try. And there's always this like ambition. Somebody has to give you a chance to do it again. And
Yeah, but man, that's really, I find that that's the hallmark of a real artist, because if you're satisfied, then you're doomed.
I guess I'm very happy and proud, and then immediately after the moment's passed, I just can't wait for the next shot. It doesn't mean I feel like I still feel happy, but it counts for nothing because I just have to do more.
So do you have now? But that's, I mean, well, so you're in Berlin now. You gave me the Sasha vague blurry cloud. Like, are you thinking about working with someone else, or is this thing you can talk about, you can't talk about, or
Sure, no, I can say
you're
a
just
few
floating
words.
for a
I
while?
mean, I am together with a few friends of mine that I've done a lot of work together with them before, many different projects. We will actually probably announce something more formally, but we are working together on a few projects for various car companies at the moment. Some of them very exciting and hopefully to be revealed next year as well. So there's definitely, let's say, I'm running a design studio. That's sort of as much as clear. But I would not have left my role as head of design at Koenigsegg just to run an independent design studio. I do want to build cars, and I do want to expand my horizons. And I feel like I learned a little bit at Koenigsegg and a little bit at Bugatti and at Genesis and all these different places. And I feel like I want to apply the knowledge that I have and make something of it. I also feel very restricted by the confines of automotive design as a discipline, right? So I never was a fan of silos in terms of approaching a project. I don't like to think of it separating packaging and engineering from human factors, design, from manufacturing, from customer relations. It's just the whole thing has to fit holistically, and I would love to have a chance to you know
So is that how you're working now? You're working in that kind of free form format?
yeah, actually, with a couple of clients that we have at the moment, they're definitely coming with a task that is wider in scope than just here's a technical drawing and we want the best looking exterior based on that technical. That's not how the projects are being framed, and I really appreciate the fact that they're trusting a little bit more than just the graphics of the front view to our team right now. So I really appreciate that, but also just going forward, I would like to grow more in the direction of, let's say, mm, blurring the lines that the profession sort of has, or blurring the confines of automotive design as a discipline, and doing definitely creating cars, but creating cars in almost like an old school way, where what is it about the Golf Mark One that is truly remarkable? It's certainly not the headlight theme. You know what I mean? Like, it's just that's not where the genius of that car is, and I don't feel like we're, as car designers, we're kind of entrusted with such big platform architecture, visionary decisions anymore. It's become so confined, and I'm not necessarily, I'm not striving to create the next Golf Mark One. Not at all. I'm mainly passionate
What
about
makes the
sports
what
cars.
makes what makes the Golf Mark One so genius for you?
Well, I really like the fact that they made the Beetle and they kept making the Beetle and they kept making the Beetle without anyone saying, let's redesign the Beetle and make it look more contemporary. They sort of just kept making the Beetle until they changed the packaging around thoroughly and they freed up more interior space and they've created a safer vehicle. And then by doing a packaging revolution, they've completely reimagined the shape of that car too. So in a way, Golf is, let's say, truly the second generation Beetle, but it shares nothing with the predecessor. It's just the revolution in terms of packaging, ergonomics, production, everything warrants a different shape for the car. You were never challenged as a VW designer at the time to just come up with a fancier taillight or a brand new bumper. It was just a big wholesale reform that delivered this breakthrough. And then they sort of just made the Golf for the next foreseeable future. And we're still waiting to see what the next chapter of that story is going to be. But
Isn't the Panda a packaging revolution too?
it for sure is, definitely, and you could even say the Mini is a packaging revolution too. And I guess a lot of these cars, they thought of similar things when they did what they did. But for me, as a VW guy, but just because that was my first company that I worked at, but even before I joined VW, I was always a fan of this Bauhaus Germanic kind of form follows function, and of course the Italian cars of the era are also like that. But just VW somehow had a special place in my heart. I was never a Fiat fan, but VW
Right.
I could definitely relate
Are you a Dieter Rams fan?
for sure. I mean, you can't not be, right.
Right.
Absolutely.
Well, I imagine actually there's plenty of people who are not, but if you're a nerd and into design, you can't not be. Quite right.
Yeah, and then that level of purity and that level of clarity of thought is something that I think is so often missing in car design, and it's so hard to achieve too. It's like impossibly hard. But yeah,
Why do you think it's so hard to achieve clarity of thought like that? Do you think it's
um,
because I suspect is it because everyone's siloed, so you're never really having a direct conversation, you're never really working in tandem or in unison? But I'm sure there's what else do you think?
I think it's the complexity of the product that is on a whole different planet, because a car is a few different worlds, right? A car is a mechanical object that needs to perform. It is also a vehicle for occupants that are inside. So there's part of an interior space that is more similar to, I guess, a purpose-built living room in a way than it is or a tight fit glove, or and then there is the safety aspect to it as well, and then there is the marketing that comes on top, and the competition and the sales, and it's just, if you imagine a car, it's like an intersection of so many different spheres that maybe I'm really kind of naive when I say this, but I feel in a way that something like a MacBook or an iPhone is much more clear as a scope of its abilities. It fits in the palm of your hand. There is it's still absolutely genius. And if we could make a car that sort of singularly, minded, and that clear, it would be amazing. But there's just so much coming together with a car, so many different disciplines. There's the upholstery, there's the stamping, there's the composites, there's the crash, there's the simulations, there's the
Also,
aero.
the function of a car, particularly the kind of cars you make, is so different from life, and there's so many different functions, so many different things a car of the kinds you design has to do. It has to be sculptural. It has to be extraordinary. It has to, it has to do all the things you've been talking about, but it also has to represent who you are as the buyer. It has to give you a visceral, you know, an incredible sense of excitement when you're driving. It has to do all these other things that a phone is for all the iPhone, for all its genius, doesn't have the task at hand that you do.
Well, I think
Those
we tried to go towards that goal with the CC850, especially. I think it was a very good, the closest in terms of project that I ever got with a team and with a company of sort of aiming at something that pure. I'm very, very happy. I'm very proud with the result. But when we speak about Dieter Rams or still, I don't know. I don't know whether a car can be that perfectly simple, beautiful, and that to the point, that much to the point.
That's a good question. I wonder. I mean, is there a car that's that simple that just kind of that speaks really clearly like that?
I'm
You know
not
what I saw the
sure.
other day, which I really liked, was the Lamborghini Code Zero by
Code
the
Zero.
Japanese designer. The Japanese designer who did the design the
Oh,
Enzo.
oh, you're talking about Ken Okuyamas' work.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Because he
Yeah,
inspired
Ken
me to
was a
do.
huge influence. I mean, he was a art center department chair and a teacher at art center when I went to school. And my favorite class was, he taught as a guest speaker car architecture class that absolutely was an eye opener for me. A lot of the other instructors were talking about drawing cars in different perspectives, and how you should always lay out your presentation for maximum visual impact. And this guy came in and just started drawing technical packages and was like, "What's the difference between a 3 Series and a Passat? Can anybody tell me?" And everyone was like, "Well, we don't know. It's like 4 seat, 4 door." No, this is what an inline six looks like, and this is where the gearbox is, and this is how transaxle. Right? It's just explaining these things, and then you were like, "Oh wow, so that's why the cars look slightly different, but one of them is so much more attractive than the other." And then it was very, very influential. Ken, I loved his
So
class, and we're
interesting, man.
still friends. We're still in touch.
Please tell him that he influenced me. This is the most miserable connection to Ken I can think of. I bought a very odd car 3 or 4 months ago. De Tomaso Guara.
It's cool.
So, but it's red, and I hate red sports cars. I just loathe it. I loathe red sports cars because I feel like you already have a sports car. Do you have, red is just like, hey, everyone, pay attention. Not only is it's like having the number plate on the back that says, if I got Guara on them. But so I changed the color. But then I've always loved what he did with the Code Zero, the Lamborghini. And one of the things I thought was and look, I'm a totally shallow bastard, man. So I know nothing about how cars work and the packaging. Although I'm talking to you, it's actually fascinating because, well, anyway. But anyway, one of the things he did on the Code Zero, other than the fact that I know, sorry, I went down a wormhole, is that he designed the car was silver on the outside, but then the inside, the door jambs, all that stuff was green. And I
Right.
thought that was so interesting. It was kind of like an English suit where you have it's a gray suit, but then you have
Mhm.
a pink silk lining. I thought that's interesting. No one's done that. No one really does that. And then you guys did it on the Jumeirah. Isn't that what
Oh
you
yeah,
did?
we had this yellow bright
Yeah, which I loved.
atmosphere.
I love those colors. Anyway, so I did the same thing on the Guara. I have a yellow. I did the inside of the doors yellow. You know what? It's a miserably sad and pathetic story. I'm just going to stop telling the story immediately because you knew him, and I want to talk about the idea of it, the architecture of things or the packaging of things, because it's really something you don't, that as a car fiend, I never think about. Um, but it's interesting when you talk about that's how those cars feel different inside, because the inside experience is so important, and the inside experience is dictated by how things are laid out mechanically, right?
Yeah, I guess I would even say more than that. Basically, outside of packaging, nothing makes sense. Like this is the only thing that is truly of value in terms of getting a good car or getting a bad car. I don't know whether the most talented, the most skilled, the most amazing car designer in the world can make a car look better than its package. Worse than its package for sure. You could definitely not use the opportunities that the package provides and end up with a turd when you had the potential for something truly beautiful. But you can never outperform the package in a way. If the limitations that thing sets for you are there. It's like cutting a suit in a way. Of course you can make it look great, or you could make it look really bad, but you can sort of you can't jump higher than your own head in a way. That's the ultimate. And if you really want to create the best possible cars, you have to really get your hands dirty with engineering and with packaging, with squeezing every last bit of let's say opportunity space out of that package.
Well, all that goes to your point about not working in silos, because presumably, and look, I have no experience as a car designer, but I would, is it in a larger company, I would assume, and tell me if I'm wrong, that you presented with a package and then you have to clothe it? Is that how that
Yeah,
works?
very often. Very, very often
Okay.
that's the case. I would say 90% of the times, 95%. And then the scope of freedom that you have is sometimes so restrictive where you'll get told that although you've cleared every single engineering lineup up till this date, unfortunately, the hallway that they use for in the factory, where they unload the bumpers that just arrived from the bumper factory, is this particular width, and the bumper that you've designed doesn't fit through that particular tight spot of that particular hallway. So you will have to redesign and come up with a different set of cut lines on your exterior to facilitate this logistic bottleneck. And that's how restrictive these things are. And then obviously working on hypercars and super sports cars, you'd hope that this would be different, and it is up to an extent, but then only at Koenigsegg really was I witnessing and partaking in full on freedom to come up with stuff. And that doesn't just extend to the shape of the shoulder or the sculpture of the front fender. No, it was about grounds up. You could come up with an idea for something that is completely not within the scope of your work, and if you presented it to the team, and if you presented it to Christian, and you said, "Look, I just something that came to my mind. It had any potential. It would happen right away." And those things. I mean, when you look at the way those cars are laid out, you know that. Some of them have no gearbox; it's a direct drive with a crazy torque converter, and others have 7 clutch, 9-speed gearboxes, and it's just craziness of engineering allows so much more exciting opportunities in terms of what a layman would consider design. But that's just the cherry on the cake. It wouldn't be there if the cake wasn't there. You wouldn't have a chance to do all that awesome stuff if it wasn't for that technical innovation and technological freedom that company and Christian himself sort of stands for.
So why did you? It sounds like it's. I mean, I would imagine it's going to be impossible to go backwards, having sampled the kind of like Valhalla of automotive design.
Go backwards to where? I mean, I'm not necessarily looking for immediate employment in a car company. I'm enjoying the freedom that my uh, current setup allows me. I'm still, by the way, working with Koenigsegg. I have
Can you
sort of.
please make a car that isn't like 5,000 horsepower, man? Just once. Just for like a geezer who's a little scared of going super high speed on the autobahn. Like, you know what, man? Is it not possible to make a car that's 300 horsepower, that's really light, that looks amazing, and doesn't cost $1.8 million? I would just knock one out for me, Sasha. I
I would
can
love
Venmo
that.
you. I can Venmo you some money, man, today, we just crack out a quick design, we'll print it out 3D.
No, I would love to do that. I would love to do that. I mean, mm, things do get a little bit more complicated with modern homologation standards when you're trying to adhere to certain road safety norms that exist today, and be it pedestrian impact or just in general being part of a traffic that is made up of 3 ton um, SUVs and trucks. So the norms have changed a little bit, and with them, unfortunately, so has the sort of the lower barrier for what is acceptable as a size for a car. It's grown. I had an experience recently as a passenger in a very extreme sort of a club racer Exige second gen, and it is incredible. I was absolutely in love with that experience, but I don't know whether we would be able to design a car to that level of well, to be blunt, also danger. In today's car companies, if you said, well, let's throw all that stuff out. Yeah, no airbags, 4-point harness. Yeah, forget side crash. Who cares? So all these things, they do end up giving you a very exciting product. But if you put that on the road today, chances are you won't be allowed to drive it. Or the companies that produce those cars don't feel like putting their trust and their logo and their legal department behind those products anymore.
Do you think um, would you like to design something that wasn't as extraordinary as the things you've designed so far? Like I guess I don't want to say a normal car, but maybe one one for mortals.
I don't know. I don't know. What I really like is doing things that are extreme. And if it's extremely normal, I would love to do that.
You mean like okay, this is genius, man. What
No, you that
what would be extremely
I'm not coming up with this as we go along. That's been a concept in my mind for 10 years now.
a norm? Well, what would be normcore? You'd like to design something. What would be an extremely normal, like a Matt across the way flashed at me Fiat Multipla? Like, is that not what would be extremely normal in your mind?
Yeah.
An
So
extreme
extremely
normal car.
normal without revealing any of the secret sauce that I came up with for this thing.
That's right.
So you know how like people always talk about, and I always talk about the same thing, cars being a reflection of our personality. But what if you just want like a Levi's 501, what if you just want like your Converse shoes? What if you just want like stuff that is normal? What if you don't want to have like a feather up your ass when you walk out of your house every day?
Well,
Like a
as an English person,
peacock
I always
feather.
want to feather up my ass, man.
Yeah, well, what if there's that one particular day when you just don't want any of it, and then you just want something normal? What would that look like?
Well, I don't even know what that means. What I mean, aren't isn't like a Honda Accord normal?
The Honda Accord is like you have somehow failed normal. But
You've given up. You've lost the will to live.
yeah, well, what if it
You've
was
given
like
up on life.
really, really sort of like, I'll give you an example. How many people want a MacBook Air, the brand new one with the M2, right? A lot. But it's an absolutely normal laptop. I mean, if you think about like a child drawing a laptop, that would be it. Well, of course, it's got its fit and finish, it's got its craftsmanship, it's got its amazing operating system and all the services that Apple provides, and it's just a beautiful product. But it isn't something that is extraordinary. It's normal, right? There's a sense of normality about stuff that they do. And what would be a car that has that level of idiotic simplicity, no brainer like usability, but also not failing at life?
So, well, one of the things, well, look, obviously this has been talked about to death, but the thing that makes so many Apple products genius, and I feel like they used to be actually more genius and they're less genius now, was this seamless the seamless GUI, the seamless interface, the way that you didn't have to learn anything. It was all intuitive. And with cars, then there's nothing really intuitive about cars. The way you interface with cars is just you've learned the language of cars. It's not that they don't learn your language. You have to learn how the indicator stalk and all the rest of it. And there's no seamlessness to that. Is that part of what you're talking about with normal, or am I just on some crazy field tangent again?
That's a very interesting concept. But I mean, by this point in time, when most of the people who intend on driving already know how to drive, it's also dangerous to break those habits because outside of full autonomy, we are talking about a situation that may arise that requires a
Human interaction.
momentary and uh, uh, safety critical response from the driver, right? So if you start to throw in curveballs like, hey, by the way, what you thought was brake is not actually the brake because it's not as clever as now we've come up with this new thing called something else. Well, but when an accident is about to happen, your foot searches for the brake. It has to be there. So there's that aspect to it too. So as opposed to Apple reinventing some of the user interface stuff and annoying their customers for the first 3 weeks of using that new feature, and everybody gets used to it later. But there is no do or die situation when it comes to using a MacBook, but there could be a potential do, die, or kill others situation when using a car. So I think
You
there
want to
safety
avoid that.
factor. Sorry?
You want to avoid that. You want to avoid
Yeah,
killing others in the car if possible. Okay,
ideally,
well,
yes. Ideally,
can you
yes.
reveal, without revealing the secret source, one aspect of this? This is one of the this is one of those Sasha blurry cloud statements that you're a specialist at.
I've
What
never was
what
before. I don't know. It just this side of me just materialized out of nowhere.
is I brought it out of you. Uh,
So
one of my
one aspect of this normal idea, imagine if there was like a car company that made like a sedan small, sedan medium, and sedan large, and they all looked exactly the same down to the last shut line, but they were just different sizes. And the only reason you'd pick the larger one is, well, because you were maybe slightly larger yourself. But there was no inherent value to size. You wouldn't say, well, I have the 7 Series, therefore I'm the king of the hill. And you with your 3 Series, you're like a nobody. No, no, no. It's exactly the same car. Like, having a 13-inch MacBook is no better than having a 16-inch MacBook. It's just, I have less space in my bag and I don't need a big screen. That's about it. It's not
doesn't
even cheaper.
Tesla sort of do that?
Again, not failing at life.
You know what I think answers that
I
question?
Tesla's doing a lot of things amazingly well, but I'm not personally a fan of the looks of those cars. That's
Yeah, I
just
know.
not doing it for me because I still want, even in the most normal of cars, I still want this fundamental automotive sense for what sits well on the wheels, what is proportionally sort of pleasing, and I I don't know, there's just something weird with the way these cars interact with their wheels. They always seem like they've borrowed their wheels from somewhere else. They're just it's
I know
not
what you
coming
mean.
together.
I find it upsetting when I see cars that are not well proportioned or well designed. It just like irritates my OCD. And I'm not a car designer, man, so I can't even imagine like for someone who does it as a full-time thing, it must make you mental.
A little bit, actually, a little bit. I mean, the cars in general, they've been. Everybody says that the wheels have gotten huge, but the wheels are barely keeping up with the rest of the car in terms of proportion.
Right.
I saw like an old Jaguar. I think it was an X. What is it? I don't know, like a four door.
The next
Four door.
G220, the best car ever made.
That one is amazing. Yeah. No, like a classic Jaguar four door sort of sedan slash I don't know low coupe whatever
You
from
mean
the
from the one from the
ex-
70s or the
from the
70s?
70s
Oh,
70s.
I think those are beautifully proportioned, man. I love
Yeah,
how those look.
but I mean that thing is literally 1 meter 30 to the roof, so 1 meter 25 maybe to the roof. So that's a four-seat, four-door sedan that is lower than today's 911.
Right. Well, I mean, going back to what you were saying earlier, man, I mean, it's all, the safety considerations, pedestrian safety, all the rest of interior passenger safety, all that stuff, I
Plus the
guess makes
dimensions of human bodies.
right. Oh, that's a very good point. We're much larger. We're much larger human beings than we used to be.
As well as we think of ourselves as much larger.
You mean from an ego point? Or right, that's true. Also depending what country you're in.
True.
That would actually be a very interesting thing to see how people consider themselves according to different countries. Like, where's the ego the largest?
No, but it's surprising. But I did work on a couple of projects for an Asian market where they just were going completely out of control with headroom requirements. I just kept wondering, what are these people wearing inside their cars? I mean, It's just to the point where you could literally have, your child on your shoulders and you'll still fit inside the car.
Really? That's interesting.
I
Oh,
hate cars where you don't feel like you're cocooned in a way. That's the best feeling in the car, where you feel like, well, it's a tight space. I'm comfortable. I'm not being pinched and squeezed anywhere, but it's just like a tight fitted, perfect glove or
like you're
something
wearing
that
the
is,
car.
yeah, you're wearing the car, and there's still
You know what,
safety
actually,
margins around you, but yeah.
the car I had an Alpine A110
Mhm.
years ago, and that was the really of all the cars I've ever owned, that was the only car I felt like I was wearing it, and it wasn't cramped in there. I just it was just around me,
Oh, you've had
you know.
some really amazing cars. I'm blown away.
Well, thank you, man. Look, it's I'm a you know I've always loved cars my
Awesome.
entire life. I mean, I guess in another life, maybe I would dream to do what you do. So it's owning those cars is as close as I can get to doing what you do. Um, but thank you for saying that, man. I mean, from someone of your caliber, that matters. It's not just a random geezer. You've
But I
done
I
stuff.
really appreciate people who love cars and sort of, yeah, obviously, if means allow, own those cars, because it's just it's annoying when they become part of museums and cultural heritage, and they're not actually being driven and not actually being enjoyed. So I hope that there's more people in the future who continue to do that, and not as an investment, but as an actual sort of joy to themselves, for themselves and for the others around them.
Do you remember? Do you remember what it was about cars that made you obsess over them, made you fall in love with them when you were a kid? Like the thing. I mean, I'm sure you get asked this question all the time, but do you
Yeah,
remember what
it's
it
like a
was?
particular moment. I mean, I always like cars. So my parents say that my first word was uh, car, and the second one was red. So yeah, I guess we disagree on that one.
Oh no! Well, Sasha, thank you so much for being part of the podcast. So,
So, but there was that. But then there was also, I was obsessed with jet fighters as a kid.
oh, me too.
And then as Soviet Union sort of was falling apart and some little mini conflicts happened, I saw military in action and didn't really enjoy what I saw. So I became a convinced pacifist as a kid already, and to this day I have no interest in being near or entertaining, even aesthetically thinking of those things as beautiful anymore, because they are just designed to kill.
Mm.
And as I was going through like that sort of realization that pacifism meant I would never become an airplane designer, whatever that means. I remember being at my grandfather's house, and he had like a really old 70s car magazine, which again was super hard to come by in the uh, final days of Soviet Union. Maybe things got opened up a little bit, but prior to that, you could never find those. And on the last page, there was a picture of a 126 C2 or C3 Ferrari Formula One car, so like probably like 82, 83 years. It was, I think, Villeneuve and Arnoux, but I can't be sure anymore. But I'd like to think it was Villeneuve. And it was this two Formula One cars sort of going down the straight, and they just looked. You forget jet fighters; they looked way cooler than jet fighters because they had stance. They were properly planted. And I figured like jet fighters are for babies. Like this is it. This is so much more exciting.
Did
The
you like the
wheels,
sound of them?
huh?
It's interesting. You talk a lot about stance and wheels. Like that's a real
Yeah,
thing for you, the way things sit.
yeah. That's the aim of all car design.
Well, yeah, but it's also interesting. Like I've had so many cars that you just like the either the like the I noticed in the 90s that so many cars the wheels are sort of inset, and they also tend to ride a little bit high. And then when you lower them a little bit and you make the and this is one of my OCD things, then immediately the car looks so much better. But it seems like they were doing that to some degree in the 60s and 70s, and then they sort of forgot to do that in the 80s and 90s.
When we had projects back in the day which were like facelifts of current cars, as a VW designer, I was always jokingly asking how much budget there is and saying just buy spacers and bigger wheels. Like that's all. You just
I know.
drop
I
the
mean,
torque.
it's amazing. You just do that, and the car looks immediately amazing.
There, fixed it for you. Done.
Yeah.
No,
100
it's
grand
yeah.
bill, please.
Wheels are a
Funny, I
big deal.
remember the first, I must have been, God, like 10, 11. No, actually a little bit older. This is London in the early 80s. I Outside my house was a white Aston Martin Lagonda. And and it was just, I mean, you think about all the cars that were knocking around in the early 80s. There wasn't much of great I mean, well, actually, there was the 928, which I loved, and then there was the 635 CSI, which I loved, and then, but God, that thing, it was a revelation to me.
That's
The
pretty
shape.
cool. Yeah,
I mean, it's
it's
a ridiculous shape,
kind of a
but
wedge,
in
right?
yeah, but I don't know. I just never forgot that. And I remember peering through the window and seeing the crazy dashboard with all the push buttons and the steering wheel and the whole thing. Yeah, I know.
Cars are special, man.
Yeah.
Love
Well,
cars.
okay. I want to say, Sasha, man, I've taken a lot of your time, um, but I've really thank you, man. I've really enjoyed this conversation with
It's
some
been a
excellent
pleasure.
arguments. It's been a real joy, man, and thank you so much for coming on, man.
Thank you, Phil.
And
Was
good luck
was
on.
fun. You're super knowledgeable, a great connoisseur. So I'm very honored.
Well,
Thank you very much.
well, I'm the one who's honored that, and please, the most success, man, for your new. I mean, if you're doing new stuff, I'd love to have you on in 6 months or whatever. And if you want to talk about it, I'd love to, man. That'd be great.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Right.
It was
Thanks
great
again, man.
pleasure. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you, Sasha.
Take care,
All
man.
right.
We'll be in touch.
Bye, man.
Bye.